I'm recording it locally?
Yeah, I can do locally. I think it's fine. If it just I think it will actually generate a file on your computer.
Yeah,
so
we'll figure out how to get it to you.
Yeah. Just let's figure out it after meeting. Cool. Thank you. Okay, so so I think you folks can see the browser, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So we actually rewrite the spec of the component and the trace, and well as the definition part based on the feedback from the community. So right now, this is how it looks like. The first object is, of course, component definition, which is the replacement of the existing component and previously component schematic. In that sense, what it carry is mainly about the schematic of your component. That means a component provider can register their components with this object by providing a schematic, which are essentially templates of your workloads or your component instances. We will of course still support the existing Kubernetes API resource-based template, so nothing changed here. We intend to support more types also, in this release, including Q, Helm. I think Microsoft also have opinions on support ARM. And there is a proposal I see. I think it's under this comment. So some people are proposing that we should make this part extensible. So in the future we can add more types. I actually agree with that. Though I just want to defer that change into a future feature, because right now we only have fixed types, and we do not have requirements to make this section fully extensible, because this will actually need a lot of change in implementation side to make this part a extension point. So I don't think we can make it in this release. So this is more like a to-do in next or even next release. But I agree, the final direction, if there are requirements from the community to make this part extensible, I think the future direction is exactly make this part fully extensible. So in that case, there will be a type and there will be a schematic. So it will be things like that. But in this release, I think what I'm proposing is to keep it as is and support only limited types of schematic in this section. And the second section is a workload type description, we also have similar concept, which name is the workload type and workload definition. So this section is basically a reference to a workload definition, which is a descriptor of your workload type. So for example, if you provide a name for that, like this, then it will reference to a workload definition with the same name, like below. And the workload definition will carry all the information about this workload type, including its CRD, including its child resources. So it's basically same as it is today. The only difference is we make it a reference. And also, I'm proposing to add a mutually exclusive section, so we can actually use the GVK instead of name to reference the workload definition. But in that case, you can see here that we can essentially skip the workload definition. And I'm also open to. So I think we actually bring discussion that we are open to remove workload definition, but according to the discussion with Kaylin and I think Daniel, that we all agree that we should keep the workload definition at least in this release, and then we can see how we can evolve that object to make it more useful. So in that sense, I think the name-based reference will be the primary user case in most systems. But we also have a way to let users to skip the workload definition if they think it's actually unnecessary. And my thinking that we can see, okay, how people are trying to leverage these two different approaches, and we then can decide whether we want to keep one of them, or maybe in the future, actually we can evolve the we can make the workload definition more useful. So this is more like I think it's more like a flexible section.
But that's not a complete definition. For example, it doesn't include child types?
Right, and
No.
where did characteristics go?
So in that case, if you are using the embedded version, there's no characteristics because it's actually described by this CRD. So the two differences in these two models is not about the workload definition itself. It's actually about whether we want to use a workload definition object to describe that information, or we rely on a CRD to do that. Because essentially a CRD can actually carry similar information if you want. This is actually a discussion we raised before. So whether we want to use a CRD directly as a descriptor for a workload type, or we use a object to describe. I think, did that make it clear? Because you can actually add all of this information and labels or annotation in your CRD. This actually is also the one way to do that. I'm personally not very sure which one is the best. I also like to, I don't know, what's your opinion on that?
I don't know who you're asking. I don't know either. I need to see what like a proposal around what would we dump in the CRD, and there's weird life cycle issues around that. I don't, you know, we can annotate other people's CRD with things later.
Yeah, there are already some practice in the community that people adding labels to their CRD to carry this kind of information.
Huh.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I need to say, but I don't know if that's the direction. I'm not very sure about that. So we do allow that actually today if they want to do that. A proposal would be we actually stop that, right? We only have this field to carry the reference, and then in that case the workload definition should be the must-have. I'm also open for that, so we can discuss whether we want to do that or we want to have this kind of flexibility. I'm personally open for both. So I'd like to know your ideas regarding to that.
Okay, when now? Right now?
My side, from my side, at least, I think it's okay having both as of now. But yeah, we can give it a more deeper thought on this.
Okay. How about what do you think, Kevin?
Well, I mean, I'd rather not have both, but I mean, I understand sort of the test the waters kind of model, where you want to see what people prefer, but I think that as long as we have type and definition is experimental, I can probably live with that. Yeah,
I think we definitely want to add a experimental, at least experimental annotation in this field. We should do that. So right now we are using workload definition approach. I mean, Alibaba side, and there's no issue with that. Of course, it works very well. So this section is more like a thing we want to experiment. So in that case, there are another approach, and we do not include this section in spec. But in the implementation side, we allow that. It's another approach. What do you think about this one?
I don't think you're likely to get much experimentation from the community if that's the case. You might get it at Alibaba, but because it's there. If you have concerns regarding to this field, I'm totally okay to do not include this feature actually, even in implementation side, because right now we are going this approach. It works. We just need to find a way to get feedback whether they want to have this one in the future. Okay. I mean, it really comes down to how valuable the information in the workload type descriptor, or the workload definition is. So it's. I think get the point as, okay, we do not include this section, and then we try to get more information or feedback from the community, whether they want to have this field on this definition object or not.
and then decide what's the next move. Is that your suggestion?
That would, I would certainly be, that would be okay with me, yes. I'm not sure if it's okay with you, but it's okay with me.
I'm okay with that. I'm totally okay with that. So I think in this release, we can just do this, only have type, and we, in that case, we make a workload definition a must-have. I'm totally okay with that. This is actually what we are doing today, so I have no problem with that. And then we need to try to find a way to get some feedback whether the workload definition stuff makes sense or not. That is one thing we want to do in the future. Sounds good?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, sure. So yeah, these are these two objects, which is the most important part. And for the third object is application. No big change. And we actually accept a very valuable feedback from Kevin that we need to allow reference component definition from the different namespace. So the previous proposal, we had a namespace field in this section, but I think Kevin actually raised a nice design. So we use this style. This style full will be the namespace. It should work. So how do you like this idea, this design? If you want to go this way, I think it's actually looks better than we have a namespace field in this section. What do other folks think? Kevin, I think I'm reflecting your design correctly, right? To have a namespace, right, and then the component name, right?
Right. I mean, when I raised it, I was wishing that you know, the Kubernetes at large had some form of a single line reference, which they don't ever appear to do. So you know, on one hand, I like the brevity and the conciseness of this. On the other hand, it makes me uncomfortable that this isn't a standard thing.
Yeah, I think we can do that because Kubernetes today in their UI, for example, in kube control, in kubectl, they do show object like this. So I think but
that's not that's not how they use it.
But it's not a convention. It's not a convention.
But when in kubectl, when they do it, it's always like, you know, pod slash, not namespace slash, it's type slash or kind slash. So it's
So I have a question about this, and because, well, it's another question, but it's pretty related with this. So let's imagine that we are creating an application in my namespace and referencing a component that is defining another one, right?
Yes. Yes.
So this component instance information, the status and things like that, the expectation is that I will have a component in my namespace, right? So I will take the other copy, or where is the instance information of that?
So you don't need to, so system will not copy definition to your namespace. The definition will always be another namespace. So, but the system will actually instantiate the instances based on the definition. So in your namespace, you only have this application and the underlying running instances.
But when you say running instances, you mean deployment, for example?
Yeah, deployment. Yeah, Kubernetes resources in your namespace. So you won't need to have all the definitions in your namespaces. It's actually an idea of isolation. So you isolate you can actually isolate definitions in for example, a system namespace, and your users will have user namespace.
I'm asking this because we have a question or a comment on this proposal that was related actually with where are we going to store status? Like if we allow the users to reason about OAM states in the sense of if I need to go and how I know that my application is running. This is one of the things that
I see.
No? So
yeah, I think I actually see your comment. I think those status should be part of the application status instead of definition status.
Yeah, so having an application status, let's say, that is composed by the individual components that it references, right? That makes sense to me. Like if this application references two components, having a status that has an extractor that says also like this component is running and things like that. That would be pretty useful actually. So
I agree with that. It should be part of the application status.
Okay.
But I assume everything in application status is platform dependent.
Is what?
Is not part of the spec, meaning it's platform.
Correct. They are not part of spec. So implementation will handle that part.
Well, actually, you define the status also in the CRD, right? So
yeah,
we can have something standard.
Yeah. So the reason we do not include status in the specification is because first of all, it's very implementation related, right? And another thing is the status need to evolve based on the real user cases. So I will expect we actually upgrade the status field very frequently based on different requirements. That's why status is not part of the spec. But I actually agree we should have something maybe named standard status, and we all follow this status, and we need to make sure that those status make sense. I think that part we will raise discussion in implementation side as a design which have all agreement from every community participants.
Yeah, I mean, I think that'd be great. At least to have some minimal information, because
exactly
it will provide
necessary information.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I mean, if that's the expectation, let's say, like, I will be able to create an application in my namespace, taking definitions that are stored somewhere else. I will have my deployment, my instance, and things like that created in my namespace. And if we can have this minimal status, let's say, in the application, that will be perfect.
Yes, exactly. And I think in the implementation, we will try to leverage a new feature in Kubernetes named the key status. It's kind of a standard way to define status. So I think in the implementation side, after spec released, we will raise an issue regarding to defining the status of application definition, what we should include. And we are actually very happy to propose another idea regarding to that.
Okay, great.
Okay, cool. So this is application. Regarding to the question, actually, Kevin raised in previous discussion about we have settings in the workload description, but we have properties in the trace description. This is actually legacy. I would say it's a legacy feature in the original design of OAM spec. So we carry all the way down to the this latest design, and I personally am very open to change them to consistent. But I ask the adapters. I mean, adapter in Alibaba as well as community users, they already have this kind of thing running in production. So if we change this kind of thing, we basically need to ask them to upgrade their whole system. So the feedback is it will be easier if we keep these things unchanged. If Kevin, it's okay with that.
Well, I don't really. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but isn't kind application brand new?
The application is a new object, but we actually already have that thing running in our cluster, and as well as several other adapters of Kubevela.
So you have other people already doing something non-standard, and you're trying to maintain backward compatibility with them?
Yeah, because the reason even application is a new object, but the settings and properties are carried from the previous application configuration. So they are not new things. We're not introducing new things. We just try to keep consistent with the previous fields in application configuration.
I
think we can always go and put the consistent naming and kind of deprecate, let's say, the other usage. Like if we believe that something is confusing, it will be probably confusing for new users. So maybe something, I mean, if we need to maintain some compatibility because there are things that are already running, I can understand that, but we can always deprecate this, and put a warning, say like, hey, you are using this field, use the other one.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So my thinking is, let's keep this thing unchanged in this release. But because this version is V1 R2, right? So if we want to go into beta, I mean, that is an upgrade, right? So we will discuss this feature, and I think it's hopefully we can change that in beta, because people will essentially need to upgrade, right? If that sounds good to you, Kevin?
Well, I mean, you're making big changes and then saying you can't make big changes because it's an alpha, it's not an upgrade, but
So I think
this resource does not exist in the 2021 spec at all. So it's not like it's a backward compatibility problem. So you shouldn't be trying to spin it that way. I mean, it's very clear that you're doing this to make your company's life easier, not because it's the right thing to do for the spec. Right?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you that first of all, yes, we want to make the existing system stable as we can. That is one motivation. But the second thing I think we're not relied is that this application thing is not a new thing. It's actually a next version of application configuration. So we try to keep using the old concept as possible that we can, at least in this change. For example, this workload settings, workload type, traits properties, they are all existing in existing application configuration stuff. So this is actually the original idea that we want to use settings and the properties. This motivation is still valid, at least today for me. Did I make anything clear for you?
No, but it's a word.
Yeah, so I think you can put aside that we have Alibaba and several other adapters already have this running. So I think we can put aside on that. So we just discussed whether this should be stating and properties. I think your opinion is that no, they should not, right? They should be same. But the current opinion from my side is that actually the reason we designed it like this is because we want to have some consistency. It's more like the consistency in the idea or in the mind side that the application is still application configuration. It's moving. It's an upgrade from that thing.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it was broken before isn't a good argument. So,
right.
But like I said, this seems very important to you, and it's
yeah, it's more
it's just a word.
You're right.
It's not structurally
like
different. It's not the data model's not flawed.
Yeah, I just want to say it's not a mistake. It's not a mistake. It's an intention. We want to do that thing.
So far, nobody's been able to explain to me the design behind the intent. Why is one settings and why is one properties?
Yeah. So let's try to explain that in the spec. I do think it's important because the reason we use settings and properties before, actually we have some reasons, but yeah, we need to, I think I would try to explain that in the specification and see if actually cause confusion. If it causes confusion, I totally agree we need to change that. But right now, I actually don't have feedback regarding to that.
So I've actually been trying to define that because these questions come up in our group. And I have used the idea that settings are responses to parameters.
Exactly.
And properties are values of attributes.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, Brian,
that's actually how I define them.
On this. Yeah, that is the original proposal we had. So stating is actually for parameters, properties are for attributes.
And I guess if you think about it like that, that's just based on how I see it. That's the only way that I could define it.
Yes, you are right. That is the motivation.
That just makes me ask, what's the difference between a parameter and an attribute? But
well, I believe that attributes are required values, parameters are mutable values.
Is that true?
That's true. Yeah, that's the difference.
For me, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to explain this to.
Yeah, it's not easy. It took a long time for me to even realize what I was trying to tell people.
Yeah, that is actually the difference. And based on that, I will say based on that theory, so traits here, they are not instances, but the component you are actually defining the instance here. But trait, they are not instances.
Well, that doesn't feel true to me at all. But There's certainly a trait instance CR that gets created, right?
Yes, but you are actually not defining trait instance in application object. They are different.
So riddle me this then: can a component have both settings and properties applied?
You mean a component have both settings and properties? You mean that?
Right. If your assertion is that settings are optional and properties are required, I think. Why couldn't I have both?
I think you could, but I don't see there any value in that.
Exactly. But anyway, I think we'll fight about it later. If you want to, if you're going to tell me now that this is a conversation to have when beta 1 is proposed, then I will have much stronger opinions then.
Sure. That's why we say, actually, I said there are already adoption of this concept. It's actually based on this theory. So traits and component, they are different things. They do not share the same model actually. So what's the conclusion here? Are we okay to keep this as is in this release, or we have strong opinion to change them to consistent way?
I vote for changing.
We're actually taking votes. I would vote to make them consistent too, but
I would prefer to make it consistent, and if there is another reason behind it, at least having, have the consistent version available for users. And if you want to support the other naming, I will think on this type of deprecation of this, how we used to name it, and we want you to name this way now. That will allow the users that are right now deploying this to work with the system they have, but you will inspire change in them.
What do you propose if we change it to consistent, may I ask?
For me, actually, it was more clear, probably the naming of parameters, because it's used in another place. But I open to discussion because a lot of the discussion are more related with how we feel about the names and how we translate them in our mind. So anyway, I think it's better to have at least something consistent in, because if we discussed this also in the past for parameters for the components and things like that. If there is something that is common to all of them, I think it will be easier for the users to reason about them. Like, this is the parameter value that I set for this parameter that I define.
Right. The word settings would make more sense if it said parameters, because you would also use from parameter. And so, your from parameter value is actually a setting. You'd think it would be a parameter.
That's the reason we choose settings before. And another candidate for that section is values. So you can change this to values.
We can use two words. We can put in the component parameters definition and in the application parameter value. You create the reference, and also is clear. One is the definition of the parameter, and in the other one is the value of the parameter.
So my proposal will be, because this field is essentially for parameter settings. It is. So setting is actually a perfect name for this one, or we change it to values. Things like properties or spec does not make sense here actually. So in that case, if you want to make them consistent, we need to change this thing to settings, which is kind of weird to me. That's the reason they are different today.
I don't get the weirdness, right? So you got some setting called image that has a value of busybox in the component, and you got some setting called replicas for the trait that has a value of 10. Well, why is that weird and confusing?
Because traits actually do not have concept of parameters.
That's because you decided not to name it parameters. You decided to make that inconsistent as well.
Sorry, what's the point here?
That's only because you decided to make that inconsistent as well. A trait does have a parameter, but you've called it an attribute.
Right, that's why we want to use different name here, because traits do not have parameters.
So do you want me to argue that the trait should have parameters, not attributes? And then would you be comfortable?
No, I think
Yeah, if you go back, that would make more sense. If you, anything that you set in an application should be a parameter, and then you could basically say traits should have parameters.
But traits is not based on templates. It's different from component. Traits are not.
I mean, there is a template.
Sorry.
There is a template. The template for scalar tells you need to have replicas.
So you propose that should also be a template?
I mean, it
or
technically
you're saying
is.
they are already templates?
They really are when you defined it.
So I think your proposal is that both traits and the component, they are all templates in this model. Am I correct?
At least logically in my mind, right?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't calling them templates in my world. I've been calling them resources, but they're all something that I use. And then if, every time you define something, I mean, what's the difference between a trait definition and a component definition? It's a different schema. And so the values that you're putting inside of them, there's either default values, and then you're, allowing those to be overridden, or it's just, or you can say from parameter. Technically what a trait is it's a templated value where they're all from parameter.
Yes, this is correct.
So technically they are all, you could say that they really are all parameters.
Yes, exactly. That is the difference in traits part. So traits are more like.
But what's the difference with me saying from parameter or required true versus just setting it as a parameter and letting you decide to put it in whether it's false from parameter or required true? I mean, I guess it doesn't matter to me, but if you wanted to make it consistent, you'd probably call everything parameters or parameter values.
Parameters, you mean for trait, you mean they are all parameter values? I mean, so your proposal, like this is parameter values and this is
those
also
are still parameter
values,
values, because technically everything from a trait is really, the trait just doesn't have a default. So everything in a trait is a from parameter.
Yes, you can say that.
So everything, so properties are parameter values and settings are parameter values. Then you tell what the parameter is and you put the value in. And basically in a trait, all the parameters are required, and in a component, those parameters could be required or not. And you can decide that when you're the, based on your workload definition. I don't have a strong opinion either or, but it all makes sense to me if you wanted to name everything the same, so it made more sense.
So if we go to that approach, what do you think should be the field? Settings or properties or something else? What's your
parameter
proposal?
Values?
Parameter values? They are all parameter values, you mean?
Yes, they are parameter values.
I'm not very sure about we have parameter values for trait.
You have parameters defined in the schemas or in the definitions, and then so I'm telling you what the name of the parameter is, in, say, my component, or I'm telling you what the name of the parameter is when I define my trait. And then I'm telling you what the value actually for that parameter is. So instead of saying just values, at least by saying parameter values, I'm telling you what it's a value for. So I know what section to look back in my definition for.
I think that's more explicit, although for some reason I have a negative reaction to just the length of it. But
oh, right. I mean, other than the length, I'm only trying to.
Right.
I'm only saying I'm just doing that because if I were logically trying to lay it out.
Right. So I'd be okay. I'd be okay with parameters used everywhere as the declaration of something that needs to be provided, and settings as the things that are provided as the values of the parameters.
So Kevin, your proposal basically we use settings for both. You're okay with that, right?
Yes, mostly because it's shorter than properties, but settings and parameters.
Okay, so my personal thinking that we can use properties for both.
Yeah, that's below my threshold of pain. As long as they were consistent.
2 extra characters.
I would vote for any consistent answer.
Okay, so I think,
right, because I mean, even when you put those down and you say that they're workload settings, those aren't really workload settings. Those are actually parameter. I mean, you wrote settings and then you wrote workload settings. That's not what they are. Workload settings are defined when I am defining my component. The only thing that you're setting actually there is you're potentially changing a default value that was already set. You're not actually setting anything. The setting was already done in my component definition.
okay, yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. You're right here. So in that sense, settings is not the right concept. So we either change that to values, or in that case, we should change all them to properties.
Well, what I hear you saying is more like overrides, but not to throw another term into the mix. But
right, yeah. I mean, really, that's what it is. But
yeah,
in that change, but it potentially isn't an override. And if in my component definition I did from parameter, and it's really just a required value.
Right.
Properties. So some hearing is, yeah, how about properties? If we use properties for both, make sense to you?
I could accept that, yes.
How about your idea, Brian?
Oh, I'm fine with that.
Fine with that?
I didn't have a strong opinion either way, but I understood the need for consistency.
Okay, yeah. I personally have never, I do not have any concern to make them consistent. If we all agree that it should be the way to go, you know, we always choose what the community asks. That is the value we have. So what I'm only have concern is what should be the right name in that sense.
I agree with the name properties.
Properties will work for
My
us.
opinion is asked, which is perhaps not the case, but I agree with properties.
There
Okay.
you go. 4 votes.
Okay.
That's the majority of 7 on the call.
I see. Yeah, I think so. If we all agree with properties, we can make that happen, and we just need some work to make that possible in our internal production environment. I will push the team to change that, and maybe sometime. But again, if the community asks for that, we can do that. So I think we have conclusion here, and so we just make sure that we do not have other opinion on other fields, correct? For the other fields, we're okay with the existing design in application.
In component, we continue using parameters.
Yes.
In the component definition.
Yeah, the definition is basically same with.
Oh, where does scope go?
Scope, no change. It's mentioned here. No change.
Right,
it's
but you
exactly
don't have
same
it
as-
listed in your application anywhere.
Because there's no change in existing. If you check an example of the existing configuration, you have the application scope here. Reference a.
Okay, so we're not going to go with the idea that I could apply a scope
Yes.
to the entire application.
Yeah, I think we'll move that design to next release. In that sense, I think it will go to the same model of trade. But in current release, I mean, in the release we're discussing today, we do not want to touch that part.
Right. So under components, there'll be in an application file, not an application configuration. Under components, there'll be a scopes, right? And the contents of that will be just identical to what it was in application configuration.
Yes, it will follow in the existing way to define component to define scopes. Not very convenient. Not very convenient.
And the flavor will be a little different than what the new traits model, but that's where we're just saying.
Mm-hmm.
Since we don't have a new design, we're not going to change the old one.
Yeah, because that's the main reason. We do not have a new design for now. So in next step, in next release, I think we need to propose a concept more like global traits, and to enable this new requirement. Sure. If we're okay with the application, then we move to the last object, trait definition. This one basically has no change. The only added section is schematic, so you can use some other way to define a trait, including Q and L. Besides that, everything works in traits today still works, including the applies to. We will not change the apply to feature in this release, so it will still apply to a existing workload definition name. So nothing changed here. In next release, at the proposal, we have a design to describe the characteristics of a workload type, and in that case we will be able to support a more I would say complex scenarios, like we implement or we support the label selectors in applies to field. So this is the next plan. So in this release, we do not change the traits at all.
And there's no like cube template for a trait?
There is in this section.
Okay, so that's one of the dots. So you call out cube and helm, but cube is also is in the spec.
Yeah, like component definition. Do you have concern with that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So this is basically what we have in this version. So application scope will not be touched in this release. We use it as same as today. There's no any other added object in this version. So not sure if you have any other concerns regarding to this. The older design in this proposal.
So the changes we discussed today were the settings to properties.
Yes.
And that was it?
Yeah.
Oh no, we talked about removing
this
definition.
One. Yes, we do not need this one. Yes.
And we kind of glanced over the status parameters in the component definition, which is something we had discussed. Is that again is like advisory, not specified?
There's no the status section. All the status section will not be included in spec.
Okay. Just wanted to have that said out loud.
Mm-hmm. Okay, seems we now have a agreement. Not sure about not sure about Daniel. Do you have any other ideas or proposals we should include?
No, I mean I wrote down a lot of comments there on the issue.
Yeah, I saw that.
They're mostly covering here. There are some, let's say, overall questions and things like that. We can discuss this as we go. So
yeah, I think the existing design we have can solve. I think they are aligned with your comments on the model side. So I think I saw you are proposing some other things. Some of them maybe we need to defer them to next release. We are happy to raise the discussion regarding that. So in next release design phase, feel free to propose them. And there are some other sides. I think they are more like implementation side. For example, how we define application status, and we can raise the discussion or design to them as soon as we can.
We will be highly interested in moving to that direction to basically to make the user able to understand what is going on with their application. So having a consolidated status, I think, is something that we need to put or to work for this version.
Yes, I fully agree with that.
Right now the thing is that, I mean, you deploy an application, but reasoning about whether it's working or not is quite difficult actually. So yeah, I think that if we are able to work on that in this, the other discussions can be postponed and discussed in the future.
Okay. So in that sense, in that case, I will try to finalize this version of the release of the spec, and I think I will reach out to your folks if you are interested in update the existing spec documentation. So for example, you want to contribute in the spec repo. I'm very happy to involve you folks to drop to the new proposal. So I will reach out to you folks offline.
Okay, thanks.
We just because I just thought about, are we going to talk at all about the number, or is 022 it, or
03?
03,
yeah,
okay.
03, yeah, 03.
That makes me more comfortable. Thank you.
Cool. So I think the spec side discussion is done. We'll move to next agenda item. I think Brian actually connected with us to share some latest design of entry point. He actually sent an email to me, but I missed that information because it's actually in the following up email of the invitation. So I think Brian, maybe you want to share the design to the community folks, and we can discuss how we handle that part.
Sure. I know I've got like 2 minutes and I'll try to go as quick as I can. Okay, so I continue to kind of go through this idea of entry points. So what I wanted to do is actually show you what some of these might look like if they were, defined. So I have this idea for us, an operator entry point would be, like a network path. So I would, just like we kind of define other things, have the ability to, create very specific entry points. So I would create a kind, define this to have a spec of, path, operations, data type, and security. So security would be like its own, underlying definitions that would be part of a entry point definition. So every time I define a entry point, these really just have, some attributes and security that go along with them. And then I'd have the ability to create parameters for those. So, same thing here. There's a different kind of entry point that I would previously define to have, these particular, attributes and another, security. So I have these attributes and I have a security. The security has a type. The type has, properties. But again, I was trying to use some of the wording from before. But basically, this is, the entire idea behind entry point. And then what I would do when I'm actually defining my application, I would say that, my component has, obviously a name, a type, the settings that go with it, but these are now properties. And then I would say that there's an entry point that goes with the component. I'd give that name, and I'd give any settings or now properties that go along with that as well. And I could have multiple entry points depending on what that's going along. But basically, this is kind of how I see entry points being defined and then used within application. And I know I'm over time, and I'll write this up even more with like what it would look like in the spec if we were to do this.
So this would be consumed by a platform to like set up network policies?
So the thought is that my application, so in our world, applications kind of need ways to get data to it. So whether it's a API or we have, different types of well-defined services. So what this thing called a C-store entry point, there's every, in DICOM, there's a service that always requires an application entity title, an IP, and a port defined for that service. And what I need to do is have those features inside of my component, but I don't know what the specific settings when I deploy it to my environment are. So an application entity title can only exist once within an entire network. So what we're trying to do is get to a point where these components can be redistributed across multiple institutions. So if I'm a platform vendor, I can now host a bunch of different applications, and they could be, so what we're trying to get is, I'm an AI vendor. I've created this container, and I know to get data in it, I need to use a DICOM C-store service or our WADO service, or I'm going to use some API. Well, I know the API specifications, but I don't know how it needs to be set up in that particular institution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the functionality in the service, but I'm not going to stick the values in. I'm going to let the hospital decide when they deploy this. Instead of like going in and filling out a config file, I'm going to just, have this entry point, which is kind of that service, and I'm going to give you the values for the service.
I guess what's not sticking yet is if it's just data injection, what's wrong with the parameter? You're trying to,
well, they really are parameters, and I guess that's kind of what we're getting at, is we tried thinking about this as potentially parameters, but I forget that we did end up having an issue with that because there was no place to kind of stick it in container. Like where do I put these things? Because there's no like entry point definition in a container to actually put it. How do I extend out, container?
Yeah, well, the Kubernetes way would be an environment variable, but that's only because that's the only way to do it. But
right, but basically, yes, these really are kind of like parameters that we want to have set specifically and already have, default values for them. So I have default values set and I can override them. And we want to be able to apply security traits to them as well.
see,
so how do I, if I give you a, I want to tell you what the username and password is to get to this network share. Or, I need to tell you where my internal hospital service is so that you can send your, so, when you spin up, you actually process data and then you're going to send the results back to the hospital. Well, how do I tell you where the hospital is when you start up? That's kind of, what we're trying to get at. Now, if this isn't correct and we can like stick it somewhere else, we'd have no problem doing that. And really, we don't have a lot of these entry points that we want to stick, but we wanted to make it consistent. We wanted to, so what we're really talking about is that we have these are very kind of specific. So to C-Store, Watto, and Stow are our DICOM ways to talk. Operator is just, network shares. And REST API, we just want to say like, okay, I know there's a defined API out there in the world, and I'm going to use that particular API. Both my application and my platform both understand that schema, and they're going to use that to, set that up. And that any of these could have any of these particular security values applied to them as well. And again, if there's a way to do this inside of the component definition, we'd be more than happy to stick it there. But we haven't truly found that.
Yeah, I have trouble. I mean, some of this like feels like a trait to me, and some of it feels like parameters, and clearly trying to sort of mix them together to do something more powerful.
Right. What we're really trying to say is, okay, you've started this, you have this service or you have this container, but I need to let you know how to get data to it, because there's no way to define that today. So it's just a container, it's running. Well, now how do I tell you to send it data to do the work that it's doing? So we're going to use scopes basically to say, this is a scope is the work that I can do. So I detect pneumothorax. So that's my scope. And when you have a piece of data that comes into your platform that says, I need you to detect pneumothorax on this piece, this chest x-ray, you spin up this container, and now I need to send the chest x-ray to the container. Where is the container listening for that chest x-ray? Do I need to drop it in a folder? Do I need to transform it? Do I need to send it to a, one of these types of DICOM services? That's kind of what we're, does it talk a specific API? And I can tell it where to go retrieve it from inside of my hospital network. That's kind of what we're trying to do, is say, okay, that's how you get to it. And by the way, that entry point is secured this way.
Yeah, I mean, I think I get the use case and what you're trying to model. It's just
because we're trying to do more than just spin up a container. The containers, I spun it up for a reason. And we want to kind of go around, add a little bit more to this entire idea than just getting it running. Because really our whole concept is I may want to spin these up, for very rare things. And we want to be able to control when they come up and when they go down based on work items that are coming in. So we've even gone through like, whole ideas of, what the workflow would kind of look like for all of this. And again, I know we're well over time, but I'm talking to some others in this group, later on this week. Maybe they have better ideas on how we can get this done. But I'd be, I'm open to coming up with a way. Ultimately, we want to use this, so that we can just define the things that are special in medical imaging, and really leverage, what we've seen in OAM to do a lot of the infrastructure work.
Yeah, I think it actually makes sense for you to have your, I would say, own specification for the medical scenarios based on OAM. I would say based on OAM. So for example, you can actually have another object to leverage the existing application to do your work. I think it's actually necessary to some extent, because I would say, personally, I would say OAM cannot cover every case, especially in the industry-related user case. OAM is more like a generic model in application delivery ecosystem. It's not, we cannot expect to cover every use case in every industry, especially in medical AI. They do have their different model, but I think it makes sense to me if you can leverage the existing object to achieve your goals. So you can actually have your own object. For example, entry point, if it can work with the application, it actually makes a lot of sense to me. I personally, I'm not very sure to including entry point concept in at least in existing release, because I do not see a generic use case for that.
Right, but how do you define how to get data to your container? Like, what is I mean, in general, if you were spinning up a container that has a service that's like listening for an API call, how do you tell anybody that it exists? You just don't care. All you wanted to do is get the container running. You don't care. You basically are putting the burden on somebody else to understand that application now exists. So you have no concept as to why you're spinning up a container. You're just using resources and spending money. You had no reason. I guess you're not allowing your platforms to be smart enough. And I think this is what, we're trying to do, is you're not allowing the platform to be smart enough to understand that this particular container is being started up for work that I was asked to do. And once the work is done, I'm going to shut that container off. Right? I understand why I'm starting the container. You have no, and I think that's what we are trying to add on top of OAM, is the concept of, I'm not only just doing this because I'm a dumb platform that could start a container. I mean, I can start a container by sticking in the Docker and hitting the play button. But if I have no idea what I did, all I'm doing is spending money. And we're trying to wrap some idea around that to understand why I would do something like this. Why did it, we're using scope to basically say, okay, I understood that this particular container does this work. And so when I get work for, that item as the platform, now I start that container, and then I know, based on the, container I just started, how to get that work item to it and how to tell it where the work, like, we really just want to understand more. And maybe this is just something I have to do outside of OAM. And basically we would just define our own piece.
So I totally agree with you on this scenario. This actually makes sense to me. I mean, the platform being smart. I will also say it's currently out of the scope of the OAM spec. For example, in Kubernetes implementation, I know some people are doing a lot of things to enable this. For example, their container will write down some file.
Right, because all we have to do is we probably just put in some annotation, and then I'll use the annotation
to
discover what the entry point is.
Yeah, exactly. So that is what we can see. People are trying to solve this. I think it works. I personally do not have intention to solve that in the standard way. So if you want to have your specification which can leverage OAM to make that happen, I think I'm very supportive to that. Or we can leave them. I mean, in my perspective, I will try to leave them these kind of things in your implementation platform side, because in that case, OAM can still be minimal generic solution, which is its original goal, instead of being a spec that works perfectly in a specific scenario. But in the future, if this kind of requirement become a generic requirement, we can actually upgrade OAM spec. But for now, I think we are still not that close to this kind of vision.
All right.
Yeah. Speaking of the vision of OAM, I think the next step I'm trying to propose, or I'm trying to discuss with you folks in the spec is more like the multiple cluster or multiple environment deployment, thing like that. Again, still generic model, instead of focus on a specific industry focused field. That is the next step we're trying to go. But again, I think I'm very supportive to know that how we can make it happen to allow you to define your own specification and implementation with the leveraging of the existing OAM model object as building block. I'm very happy to make that happen. If there's some change we need, even in implementation side, we're very happy to have that. For the spec, I'm trying to keep its focus on the current scope. And for next step, I think we're more like trying to pursue the multi-cluster, multi-environment thing instead of very specific power in the model, in the existing model itself.
Right, and I guess I'd only be maybe asking, in the future that there be something like the ability to, I can define. So you have like the core, the standard, and extended or something like that. That I could have the ability to create some other resource, and that I have the ability to define that on a component. Like I can, today you don't have a place that I could define some custom resource and just at least attach it in the spec.
That's exactly what a trait is. I'm missing something and I can't figure out what it is.
I think that is a nice proposal. We should have a way to let people to define extended object, which work around
Kevin, the only thing that I'm missing is in a trait, I can't give you what am I like and maybe traits could work, but it seems like for a trait I can't give you values that already, like I can't do default values, and maybe that's all I'm missing.
Well, I mean, that sounds like an interesting thing to discuss that would fit into the generic nature of the OAM spec, right? Something that goes into a trait definition as a default parameter or something, right?
Yes, I think we can discuss that to make trait can support your scenario. That will be in scope of the OAM spec discussion.
Right, because that would probably then help me.
Yeah.
If I could have a default value, then for a trait, then I could do it.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. For example, today we already introduced a schematic section in trait definition. I think we can start with that section maybe.
Right, because what I need to happen in that particular case is, the hospital will have something that's already defined, and that's where, today with entry point, I wouldn't have parameters defined from the hospital side, as the application has to use the hospital settings. But with a trait, I wouldn't know what they were, and so I can't consume them. And I think that's what,
I see. I can get that. Yeah, I think we can definitely move in that feature to trait definition. I think even today, for example, if you can use Q to define your trade template, it should be possible to solve your problem.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I can look at that.
Yeah, you can look at that feature to see if it can help your scenario. We're very happy to continue discussion regarding to that part instead of introducing a new concept in OAM.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think this is what we all have in today's discussion. I think we're very close to finalize the design of this specification. And again, thank you all you folks here and to give us a lot of feedback. And I think the OAM spec and the whole OAM object are looking forward to see contributions from you folks in the draft of the release documentation. And we're also open for engaging more maintainers in the spec as well. So I will try to reach out to you folks to start the draft documentation of the OAM spec. And yeah, that is the next step. Okay, I think this is, yeah, thank you very much. So that's all for today's meeting, and looking forward to see you folks in next meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Harry, I'll send you the recording.
Yeah, you can upload to a Google Drive, something like that, and then send it to me, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.